I have spent most of my life learning how to be invisible. It was not something anyone taught me directly. It was something I understood early. When you are a single mother, when your voice is soft, when your bank balance is fragile, the safest place to stand is slightly behind everyone else. Close enough to follow the rules, far enough not to disturb them. I work in medical billing for a small clinic. Numbers, codes, insurance forms, quiet work. Predictable. The kind of job where no one thanks you, but no one notices you either. I prefer it that way. Stability is a luxury when you raise a child alone. My son is 6, careful, observant. He asks questions I do not always know how to answer. He watches my face when I speak to strangers as if measuring how much of myself I am giving away. I try to model calm for him. Calm has protected us more than anger ever could. The flight was not a vacation. It was a transfer. My clinic had offered me a position in another branch. Slightly better pay. Slightly lower rent in the city we were moving to. I told myself it was progress, not ambition, just survival in a cleaner form. Airports make people equal for a moment. Everyone waits. Everyone stands in lines. Everyone follows instructions. I have always trusted systems like that. If you comply, you pass through safely. On the plane, I took my assigned seat. Economy. Window. My son leaned against me, already tired. I remember feeling relief when the doors closed. A strange comfort in being sealed inside something structured and controlled. 30,000 feet above the ground, governed by rules and procedure. Across the aisle, 2 rows ahead, I noticed him. Not because he was loud. He was not. But because people adjusted themselves around him. A flight attendant straightened her posture before speaking. A man who had been storing his bag above that row chose another compartment instead. Subtle movements. Small retreats. The baby was in his arms. The child looked too young for travel, pale, restless, wrapped in a soft gray blanket that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. The man held him stiffly, like something fragile he did not fully understand. I did not stare. I have learned that staring invites trouble, but I noticed. I noticed the expensive watch, the stillness in his expression, the way silence seemed to follow him. My son shifted against me. "Mama," he whispered, "why is everyone quiet?" I told him people were just tired. At that point, I still believed that. I believed the rules of the cabin would hold, that adults would behave like adults, that if something went wrong, someone qualified would handle it. I believed that my role on that flight was simple. Keep my head down, keep my son close, land safely. I did not know that silence can be a decision, or that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a closed space is not noise, but the agreement to ignore it. The crying started before we reached cruising altitude. At first, it was the kind of sound people tolerate. Soft, uneven, a baby adjusting to pressure and unfamiliar air. A few passengers glanced up, then returned to their phones. The engines were loud enough to cover most of it. The man did not look worried. He adjusted the blanket once, shifted the baby from one arm to the other. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. No rocking, no murmuring. Correction, as if the child were a problem to be managed. The crying grew sharper. My son looked at me. I pressed my hand gently over his ear, pretending it was a game. He smiled, but his eyes stayed fixed on the sound. A flight attendant approached the man. Her smile was careful, controlled. "Can I bring you anything, sir?" she asked. He did not look at her right away. When he did, she straightened again. Something in her expression changed, like she had remembered who he was. "It's handled," he said. The baby screamed. Not fussing, not discomfort. A deep, panicked cry that pulled attention from every corner of the cabin. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman across the aisle exhaled loudly but said nothing. The man beside her tightened his jaw. No one complained. That was what unsettled me first. On flights I had taken before, someone always sighed dramatically. Someone always pressed the call button to ask how long it would last. But here, there was only restraint. The attendants moved more slowly near that row. They avoided standing too close. One of them whispered something to another near the galley. I could not hear the words, but I saw the tension in their shoulders. My son shifted again. "Mama, is the baby sick?" "I don't know," I said softly. The crying did not sound normal to me. It sounded desperate, breath catching between screams, a rhythm that did not ease. The man checked his phone. That detail stayed with me. He scrolled with one hand while the baby arched backward in his other arm. The child's face was red now, small fists clenched so tightly his knuckles looked white. I told myself I was imagining things. Not everyone knows how to calm a child the same way. Not every father is gentle in public. Maybe the mother was in the restroom. Maybe this was temporary. The seatbelt sign turned off. No one stood up near him. A woman in the row ahead half rose from her seat, then sat back down quickly when the man's gaze lifted. It was not an aggressive look. It was calm, almost bored, but it was enough. The crying intensified. The sound began to fill the cabin, pressing against the overhead bins, vibrating in the small space between rows. My pulse quickened. I felt it in my throat. Still, I did nothing. I told myself what I had always told myself. It is not your place. There are professionals here. There are systems. There are boundaries. The attendants offered water again. He declined. Passengers avoided eye contact with one another. It was as if we had all agreed that acknowledging the problem would create something worse. The baby's cries shifted into something thinner, weaker, but no less urgent. That was when discomfort turned into something heavier. Not fear, not yet, but the understanding that everyone on that plane was waiting for someone else to act. By the time we were fully in the air, the crying had changed. It was no longer loud in a steady way. It came in sharp bursts, followed by strained pauses that felt too long. Each silence between the cries made my chest tighten. I found myself counting seconds without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. Then the sound would return, raw and frantic. The man's composure never shifted. That was the second thing that unsettled me. He did not whisper to the baby. He did not check his temperature. He did not press his cheek against the child's head the way tired parents often do. He held him upright, stiff, like something that needed to be contained rather than comforted. A flight attendant approached again, this time kneeling slightly so her voice would stay low. "Sir, sometimes pressure can hurt their ears. We can warm a bottle or—" I said, "It's handled." His tone was not loud. It was flat, controlled, final. She nodded immediately and stood up. No argument, no follow-up, just retreat. That was when I noticed something else. Two men sat across the aisle from him, both in dark suits, both watching the cabin instead of the child. They were not related to him in any obvious way. They did not look concerned about the baby. They looked concerned about the room. When passengers shifted in their seats, those men's eyes followed. When someone leaned slightly into the aisle, they adjusted their posture. My son leaned against me again. "Why doesn't he help the baby?" "He is helping," I said automatically. But the words felt thin. The crying escalated into a choking gasp. The baby's small body jerked violently. For a moment, the man tightened his grip, not gently, but firmly enough that I saw the child's arm press awkwardly against his chest. A woman, too, rose back, muttered something under her breath. One of the suited men turned his head slowly toward her. She went silent. That was the third red flag, not the crying, not even the father's coldness. It was the way the entire cabin corrected itself around him. A young flight attendant tried again, offering a small plastic cup of water. He did not take it. Instead, he looked directly at her badge, then at her face, as if memorizing something. She withdrew her hand. The baby's cries weakened again, not calmer, just thinner, strained. I felt heat rise in my chest, a familiar sensation. The same one I used to feel when my ex would tell me I was overreacting, when I would doubt what I was clearly seeing. Maybe the baby is just tired. Maybe this is normal. Maybe you are being dramatic. Gaslighting does not always come from words. Sometimes it comes from silence. From the collective decision to pretend nothing is wrong. The man checked his watch. One of the suited men leaned toward him and whispered something. The man nodded once, eyes still forward. The baby screamed again, this time so sharply that several passengers flinched. And still, no one moved. That was when I understood something I had not wanted to see. No one intended to help that child. Not because they did not care, but because they were afraid of the man holding him. I did not plan to speak. The decision formed slowly, like pressure building behind my ribs. The baby's cries had become uneven, fragile. Each breath sounded forced. My son pressed his hands over his ears now, no longer pretending it was a game. I told myself to stay seated, but my body leaned forward before my thoughts agreed. I pressed the call button above me. The nearest flight attendant arrived quickly, her expression professional but tight. "Yes, ma'am. I think the baby might need help," I said quietly. "He sounds like he's struggling to breathe." Her smile did not disappear, but it changed. "I assure you, ma'am, the situation is under control." I glanced toward the man. The baby's face was flushed dark red. His tiny fists opened and closed without rhythm. "I understand," I said carefully, "but maybe we could check." "Ma'am," she interrupted gently, "the father has declined assistance. We cannot intervene without permission." Permission. The word settled heavily between us. "He's just a baby," I replied, her voice lowered. "Please return to your seat position and avoid creating distress." Creating distress. For a moment I thought I had misheard. I looked around. A few passengers were watching me now, not with support but irritation. A woman across the aisle shook her head slightly as if I were escalating something unnecessary. The suited man nearest the aisle stood up slowly. He did not speak to me directly. He spoke to the attendant. "Is there a problem?" "No, sir," she answered immediately. "Just a concerned passenger." Concerned passenger. The phrase sounded small, emotional, unreasonable. "I am not trying to cause trouble," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I just think the baby might need—" "We have it handled," the suited man said. His tone was polite, almost kind, but there was no space in it. The father did not turn around. He did not acknowledge me at all. The crying dipped into another strained pause, too long. My heart pounded so loudly I felt it in my throat. "I am a mother," I said softly. "Sometimes when they cry like that—" The attendant's posture stiffened. "Ma'am, I need you to sit back." My son tugged at my sleeve. "Mama, please." That was the moment I understood the imbalance clearly. The powerful man was allowed silence. The staff were allowed obedience. I was allowed nothing. Even my concern became inappropriate. Passengers avoided eye contact with me now. A man in the row ahead muttered, "It's not your kid." Shame crept up my spine. Maybe I was overstepping. Maybe I did not understand. Maybe fear was making me dramatic. That was how gaslighting works. It does not shout, it suggests. I sank back into my seat. The crying continued, and everyone seemed relieved that I had stopped talking. After I sat down, something shifted, not in the crying. That continued, uneven and sharp, but in the way people looked at me. I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer just another passenger. I was the woman who had spoken out of turn. The suited man remained standing for a few seconds longer than necessary. His eyes scanned the cabin slowly before he returned to his seat. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. The baby's cry cracked again into a thin gasp. This time the father adjusted his grip impatiently. The movement was abrupt enough that the child's head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle. A small sound escaped the baby's throat, shorter, weaker. I felt it physically, like a reflex. 2 rows behind him, an older woman leaned toward her companion and whispered, "That's him." Her companion replied, barely audible, "I know." The words were not about the baby. I watched the flight attendants gather near the galley. One of them held a tablet, her fingers hovering over the screen but not pressing anything. Another shook her head slightly. They were not confused about what to do. They were deciding whether they were allowed to do it. The father finally spoke, his voice low but clear enough to carry. "Tell the captain there is no need to divert." Divert. The word landed heavily in the space between rows, so they had considered it. One attendant nodded quickly and walked away. That was when the illusion fully cracked. This was not just an overwhelmed parent. This was a man accustomed to control. A man whose presence could alter procedure at 30,000 feet. The baby's cries were softer now, but not calmer. The pauses between them stretched longer. My hands were trembling. I leaned toward the aisle slightly and addressed the nearest attendant again, this time without pressing the call button. "Please," I said quietly. "If you can't intervene, at least check his breathing." Her eyes flicked toward the suited men before returning to me. "You need to stop," she whispered, not unkindly, not angrily, just urgently. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." There it was, not confirmation, not denial, just acknowledgement. "I understand he's a father," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "He is more than that." The baby let out a weak, broken cry that barely rose above the engine noise. Across the aisle, a man who had remained silent until now leaned forward and murmured, "It's not worth it." Not worth what? The risk, the attention, the consequences. I looked at my son. He was watching me carefully again, measuring my face the way he always did. In that moment, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The systems I trusted, the uniforms, the rules, the procedures were bending. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. And the only person on that plane without protection, without status, without power was the baby. The baby stopped crying. At first, I felt relief. The cabin exhaled almost collectively, as if a storm had passed. A few passengers adjusted in their seats. Someone resumed a conversation in a low voice. The sudden quiet felt unnatural after so much strain. But the silence lasted too long. The baby's chest was not moving the way it had been. Not rising in sharp, frantic bursts, not trembling, just still. The father looked down at him, irritation flashing briefly across his face. He shifted the child upright and patted his back once. Harder than necessary, no response. One of the suited men leaned toward him again. "Is he fine?" "He's tired," the father replied. His voice remained steady, calm. As if the crying had been an inconvenience that had finally resolved itself, I stood up. This time, I did not press a button. I did not ask permission. "I think he's not breathing properly," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. Every head turned. The nearest attendant moved quickly toward me, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, sit down immediately." "I'm not trying to cause a scene," I said. "Please just check him." The father's eyes met mine for the first time. They were not angry, they were assessing. "You are mistaken," he said evenly. "My son is sleeping." Sleeping. The baby's head lolled slightly to the side. "I've seen children faint like that," I replied. My hands felt cold. "Sometimes when they cry too long, that is enough," one of the suited men said. His tone was still polite, but the space around us tightened instantly. My son stood up behind me. "Mama," the attendant placed a firm hand on my arm. "You are creating panic." Panic, the word echoed. "I am asking you to check a child's breathing," I said. I forced myself to stay calm. No anger, no accusation. "If I am wrong, then it takes 30 seconds. The father adjusted the blanket again, covering more of the baby's face. "That will not be necessary," he said. Another attendant approached, this one older. Her eyes moved quickly from the father to the child, then to me. "Sir," she said carefully, "for safety protocol, we are required to visually confirm." "No," he replied, not loudly, but final. The suited men both stood now. The aisle felt narrower, the air thinner. The older attendant hesitated. For one suspended second, I thought she might defy him. Instead, she stepped back. "I'm sorry," she said to me quietly. The system had chosen. I felt something inside me settle, not courage, not anger, just clarity. If I sat down now, I would be teaching my son something I did not want him to learn. That fear outranks responsibility. I took one step forward into the aisle. "Then I will check him," I said. The cabin went completely silent. The moment I stepped into the aisle, everything slowed. Eyes followed me. Not with curiosity, not with support, with calculation. The suited men flanked the father subtly, like shadows merging with his presence. Flight attendants hesitated just behind, unsure if procedure allowed them to intervene or if it permitted them to let me. My son clutched my sleeve. His fingers trembled slightly, and I felt a twist of guilt. I had promised him safety. I had promised calm. Now I was stepping into chaos we had no right to enter. The baby's chest rose and fell shallowly. Tiny whimpers slipped past his lips. The man's face remained calm, almost indifferent, but the tension around him was palpable. It was the kind of tension that told everyone in the cabin that even a whispered misstep could have consequences. I knelt slowly beside the baby, trying not to make sudden movements. He looked fragile, small, entirely exposed. I placed a hand lightly on his back, careful not to jostle him. The father's eyes flicked downward, a flash of something: annoyance, caution, passing quickly and vanishing. The suit behind him shifted, my pulse thudded. I realized with a jolt that nothing I was doing had permission. Every step, every movement was a quiet rebellion, and the weight of that truth pressed down on me like gravity. I inhaled, counting silently, grounding myself. Observation first, breathing second, calm always. I could feel my son leaning against me from the aisle, eyes wide, watching. I thought of every moment in my life when I had held back because I feared consequences. The quiet, the restraint, the obedience, all of it had led here. One of the flight attendants hovered, tablet in hand. Her eyes darted to the father, then back at me. I could read the unspoken tension in her shoulders. What I was doing was necessary, but it was breaking protocol. The system was failing in real time, bending under fear, and no one wanted to be accountable. My hands found the baby's tiny arm. I felt the faint warmth, the rapid pulse, and the tension in his little body. Tears pricked at my eyes, not from relief, not from fear, but from recognition. The recognition of power, of responsibility, of how fragile authority and control truly were. The father spoke softly this time. "He's fine," he said, almost dismissively. But the so.